What's up, YouTube? I want to talk about three different types of firearms. Single action, double action only. I'm going to start with revolvers. So here I have a revolver, okay? And if you look at this, you'll see it's got this little piece here, okay? It's an ejector rod. And if you've ever seen these guns, it looks like an old cowboy gun. It's always got this piece that runs along the barrel here, okay? It's an old cowboy gun. This is a single action revolver. Single action means that the trigger performs one action, okay? How to tell is real simple. You pull the trigger, nothing happens. But if you pull the hammer back and then you pull the trigger, okay, so the trigger performs one action, which is to drop the hammer and fire the gun. Single action, okay? You don't see these a lot in revolvers, really only on the old cowboy guns, single action firearms, okay? Here, a more modern revolver, the cylinder will swing out to load it. This is a double action revolver. Now, what that means is that the trigger performs two actions. Action one is it rotates the cylinder into place, and action two is it drops the hammer. Okay, two actions. The advantage of a double action revolver is in a defensive encounter, you can shoot and not worry, okay? You don't have to remember to thumb the hammer back, okay? The disadvantage to a double action is that it has a very long, heavy, usually about a 10 or 12 pound trigger pull. Takes a lot of strength to pull that trigger. Okay, that's something you can work on by dry firing at home. The great thing about a double action though is if you're at the range and you don't want that heavy trigger pull, or you need a nice accurate shot, you can pull the hammer back manually just like a single action. And notice where your trigger is, all the way to the back, and it has about 3 or 4 pound trigger pull usually. Okay, a good single action will have a good 3 or 4 pound trigger pull. So you can fire it in double action, great for defensive encounters, but you can also fire it like a single action at the range. Okay, so this is a double action. It has two distinct trigger pulls. That's what makes a gun double action. Last but not least, this little guy. Notice the absence of a hammer. Okay, this is what's called double action only. What that means is it's got that long, heavy trigger pull that both rotates the cylinder and drops the hammer. There's an internal hammer in here, or striker type mechanism. Okay, heavy trigger pull does both actions. The reason it's called double action only is because you can't thumb the hammer back and make it a single action. Okay, you don't have that option. Double action only. Okay. Terminology is real easy with revolvers. So let's talk about semi-automatics. So I've got a couple of semi-automatics here with hammers. Okay, see this guy's got a hammer just like a revolver. And this guy here has got a hammer just like a revolver. Don't laugh at me, this is my pink gun. Okay, I train a lot of females, and so I bought a pink gun. Okay, it's a great little gun too, a Walther P22. I'll do a disassembly and review video of this later. Okay, so let's talk about these two. So here I've got this guy, it's got a hammer, and notice, nothing. Pull the hammer back, click. This is a single action firearm. What does that mean? That I can't have this hammer forward and carry this gun. I have to pull the hammer back to get this gun to fire. Every time. This is a single action firearm. Now, how's a single action semi-auto different from a single action revolver? Okay? Well, this guy you have to pull the hammer back every single time. Every time. This guy, you pull the hammer back the first time. And when you pull the trigger, the slide is going to cycle. Okay, the slide's going to cycle, and that's based on the cartridge pushing that slide back. Notice the cartridge cocks the hammer for you the second time. bang, the slide will cycle, and our hammers. So in a semi-auto, you have to pull the hammer back the first time. The slide does it every other time. Okay, and this is a famous gun, the 1911, and it's always going to come with a safety. Okay, because most people carry them with the hammers back. Okay. How about this one? It has a hammer. Okay, just like, and I normally take the magazines out. Like this guy has no magazine. Okay, this one I have to keep the magazine in because it actually has a magazine disconnect, so it won't shoot with the magazine out. But anyway, so here we see our hammers back. What happens? Bang. Here are our hammers forward. This is a double action firearm. What does that mean? I can shoot with the hammer forward, or I can shoot with the hammer back. Two distinct trigger pulls. Two distinct trigger pulls. Just like the 1911, if I start with the first round with the hammer down, which I can do on this gun, when I shoot it, the slide's going to cycle. And that cycling slide is going to cock the hammer. So every other shot will be single action because the slide will cycle and cock the hammer for me. The ejecting ammunition will cock the hammer for me. So always two distinct trigger pulls on a double action. The first one, if you pull it out of a holster to shoot it, the first one, the hammer's going to be down. It's going to be a long, heavy trigger pull. And then after that, it's going to be that light single action, short trigger. Okay? So, single action, one trigger pull, the hammer has to be back. Double action, two distinct trigger pulls, you can shoot with the hammer forward or the hammer back. Well, what about this guy? Double action only. Right? Do they have a double action only in a semi-auto? You bet they do. So here's a little Beretta Pico. And it actually has a hammer, but it's a concealed hammer. You can't see it. It's kind of tucked away in the frame there. Okay? It has a long, heavy trigger pull. And you notice, just like the Revolver, I can pull that trigger every single time without racking the slide. Okay? And if you pull the trigger, long, heavy trigger pull, and you run the slide, you still get long, heavy trigger pull. Okay? That long, heavy trigger pull that goes click, click, click every time, that's a double action only. So a single action has one trigger pull. A double action only has one trigger pull. A double action has two distinct trigger pulls, both a heavy double action and a light single action. Okay, well that's great, except here's the problem. Most modern semi-automatics don't have hammers. They're called striker-fired guns. So what about striker-fired guns, huh? Tell us about those, Chris. Well, this is not striker-fired. It actually has a hammer, but again, I'm going to use it as an example. This is a very common defensive handgun. This is the LCP from Ruger, okay? And I'll take the magazine out since it doesn't have a magazine disconnect. Double check everything here. The LCP is a single action gun. And a lot of people, a lot of salesmen will tell you this is a double action only, and that is a lie. This is a single action gun. It has a hammer, okay? And that hammer, when you chamber around, you've cocked that hammer. And it's single action. How do you know it's single action? Because listen. Pull the trigger, and you get nothing. This gun will not go off again unless it is cocked again. Now, in a semi-automatic, most modern single-action semi-autos, the casing, the cartridge, will push backwards. It'll push the slide backwards. It'll cycle your slide for you, okay? And in that action of cycling your slide, it cocks the gun again, okay? All of your striker-fired guns, your Glocks, your H&Ks, your SIGs, most of your Rugers, most of your Smith & Wessons, most of your semi-automatic handguns today are single action. What that means is they have a trigger pull. It's the same trigger pull every time. And if you have a dud, if you have a dead round in this chamber, nothing's going to happen. You have to reach up and cock the gun again, just like the old cowboys had to reach up and cock their gun again. Okay? Now, as long as you don't have any malfunctions, this is perfectly okay because the rounds cycle it for you. You don't have to reach up and thumb that hammer back every time like a revolver. But don't be fooled. This is a single action. Okay? How do you tell a single action from a double action only? Okay? Let me show you. Here's the Ruger, single action. Here's the Beretta, double action only. Click. Dead. It will not shoot again. Double action. Okay? If you have a poorly struck primer or a defective round in this chamber, you can strike it again and again and again. And most of the time, if you have a bad primer or a light primer strike, a second strike will make it go off. And in a defensive encounter, that saves you time versus reaching up and trying to cycle a new round in. Now, last one. Here is a double action firearm. Double action. So, when you chamber a round, you have cocked this gun. You have cocked this gun. It's the same as pulling the hammer back on this Walther. Okay? Notice the trigger stops right here. Short, short, short trigger pull, just like having the hammer back. Click. But now watch. It resets to a long, heavy trigger pull. This is a double action, a true double action firearm. And how you can tell is it has two distinct trigger pulls. Okay? One is a very short, 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 light trigger pull, followed by what? A long, heavy trigger pull. That is a double action firearm. A double action firearm will always have two trigger pulls. A single action will always have one light, easy trigger pull. And a double action only will always have one heavy, long trigger pull. Okay? So anyway, a neat way to think of guns. What does a double action do for you? It gives you a second strike capability. If I point this gun at a threat and I pull the trigger, okay, let's get that light single action trigger, click, and this round does not go off. I can click it again and again and again. Now at some point you do need to cycle a new round into the gun because, yeah, it's not really useful to sit there and click a dead round. But it does give you a second strike capability. A single action firearm, you pull the trigger and it goes click. Okay? Click. Now what? Your only option is to reach up and cycle this firearm again. Okay? So I hope that helps. If you have questions, please send me a message. Let me know. If you have videos you'd like me to make, if you have things you'd like me to talk about, I'd love to help you out. We run our own small business, firearms training, concealed carry. Anything that you want to know about, I'd be glad to help. Look forward to seeing you around.